Hello, my name is Megan Brown, and I had a near-death experience. So I was a stay-at-home mom. I worked out all the time. I had a really lovely life. It was spectacular. I could do anything I wanted physically. I could go anywhere. I didn't have any restraints until one night when I went to bed and I started to feel a pain, a really strong pain in my stomach or abdomen area. And I was trying to stretch and do yoga stretches to try and relax my body, but it wasn't working. And the pain got more and more severe as the night went on. I think I finally fell asleep after taking some Advil. I don't even know what time it was, and I don't know how long I was asleep. When I woke up in the middle of the night, I called a girlfriend of mine who'd been over earlier that evening with her children, and I said, "Can you please come back? I'm in absolute pain and I need to drive myself to the hospital." So I had a 20-minute drive to the hospital, and I was there for many hours. I was sent home, and then I fell asleep because they'd given me a shot for pain. And a friend of mine came and picked me up because I couldn't drive. So I remember all of a sudden taking a short nap when I got home and waking up to a pain that was so brutal that I needed to be driven back to the hospital. So I was dropped off at the hospital at the emergency room, and it took all day into the night where they finally realized that they didn't have an endocrinologist in their hospital. So, and the x-ray technician wasn't there. I was in a very small hospital in the Midwest. So I was transferred to another hospital 52 miles away, where they tested me and determined that I had C. diff colitis. So it was very, very painful, and it was an extreme case. But as the days went on, the pain started moving around in my body. And I remember feeling it in my back. And I tried getting help, and I was ignored by the nurse's station and my hospitalist. Finally, my hospitalist came in. This was around 3 or 4 days after I'd been admitted. And he looked at me and he says, "I've given you 2 milligrams of morphine. I've upped you to 4 milligrams. I think you're a drug seeker." And I was livid. It was in that moment where I heard a voice say, "Make a scene, make it big, or you won't make it out." I didn't know who was talking to me, but I knew that I was in a Catholic hospital, and I'd grown up Catholic, and I was an ex-Catholic at this point and an atheist for 18 years. So I knew how to make a scene. I knew what to say, and I did. And my legs couldn't move. My feet couldn't move. I knew that my body was stopping. And I fired my doctor, and he didn't believe me. So I had to make another scene and yelling and getting people's attention, and I fired him. So he left, and another doctor finally came in, another hospitalist, and she looked at me and said, "Oh my God, she's dying. She's gained 43 pounds of fluid in 3 days, and she's turned gray. Has anybody checked her creatinine level?" Well, they hadn't. In my blood test, it showed that my kidneys had shut down. So that would explain the pain that kept getting more and more severe, because this went on for a number of days. Finally, I was taken to the dialysis department and treated very nicely. And the head nurse said, "We need your permission to start a blood transfusion," to which I got really scared, and I was by myself and I didn't know what to say, but I heard again a voice say yes. And I thought, who is talking to me? And I said yes. And I don't know how much longer after that, I was walking through the clouds, and it looked like Earth. It was beautiful grass and trees around. It felt like a park, just this beautiful park. And there was the blue sky, clouds in the sky with birds flying. And over to the left under the trees was Jesus. And I looked at him and I said, "Oh my God, you really do exist." And he laughed, and he opened up his arms, and he invited me to come over and give him a hug. I did. After giving me a hug, he turned with me. I turned to follow him. He said, "Come on, we have a lot of work to do." And I said, "Yeah, I know. You're dealing with me," because I was an atheist at this point. Well, we went and met my other guides, Archangel Michael, Saint Germain, El Moria, and Mother Mary. I had to watch my life review, to which in moments I had responded in this really emotional way, because I had been through so much in my life, and I had to feel every circumstance over again. And I had to hear what others were thinking, what I was thinking. And at times it was very upsetting, but I remember them stopping my life review so that I could just catch my breath, basically. And then they were very gentle with me and how they walked me through having this experience. It was kind of like heaven therapy. So after my life review, I was taken by my guides to another golden capsule capsule where Archangel Michael took me in while the other guys waited outside. And he told me that he needed me to kneel down. And I do remember standing as well, but he put Psalm 91. He spoke the Aramaic version of Psalm 91, held up his right hand, and this white beam of light that was just love. It was hitting my soul. And I remember feeling, this is so powerful. And after he was done with it, I could feel his power. He was so loving, so nurturing. And I started crying, to which Archangel Michael responded. He said, Megan, why are you crying? And I said, because I've been such a jerk to you guys. I haven't believed in any of you. I've said F this, F that. And I had nothing, nice to say about God, Jesus, heaven, because I had a really traumatic experience when I was 20. And I thought, wow, there is no God. In my own home, I became pregnant and then I chose, which I swore I'd never do. So I carried that around with me, and here I am in front of love in heaven. And I can't even properly describe, there are no words to explain how good it felt to be in the presence of such a powerful, incredible soul who was nurturing, loving, and non-judgmental. So after the cherubs dressed me, they had to put me in like what I call a white toga with a stole that went over me. And then at the bottom of the stole, there was an emblem of earth with 7 flames, indicating that I was just a visitor from Earth. We exited the golden capsule, and Archangel Michael and I, with my other guides, started walking a very short distance where there was this huge white temple. And there was a big dome in the center of the temple. Well, the one door. The door was like 10 feet tall, but on each side of the door, there were 2 decks. And on each deck was a little cherub playing a trumpet, playing music, letting God know that I was coming. So it was announcing my arrival. But I didn't believe in God. And so I didn't know where I was going. When I walked in, Jesus opened the door. My guides walked in before me, and I followed them. And up until that moment, I was just concerned about getting back to Earth, getting back to my child who was so young. He was 4 years old at the time. I left him at home with my girlfriend. I needed to just figure this out. I was just like, boom, let's just fix this. But this is not how it played out. So I walked into the door, and the moment that I stepped foot on the floor inside of this temple, I felt the most incredible wave of love that I have never felt before, ever. And I have never felt a love so powerful, so majestic, so incredibly calming, soothing. I also felt at that moment, because I'd had such a rough childhood and upbringing, that I didn't deserve it. And I remember feeling all of this at one time, like, where am I? And it felt like I was floating over to the table. All of my guides, except Jesus, sat down, and Jesus pulled a chair out for me to sit in. And I did. Then he sat to my left. And then to his left was this old man sitting at the head of the table. And I thought, who is this guy? And he started talking. And all of these souls, there were 77 of us sitting at this table. Everybody started listening to this man. And I thought, who is this guy? Well, within the first 5 minutes, he said, and Megan will be going back to Earth. In my head only, I said, oh. He said, oh, is right, Megan. He stopped talking to the congregation, and he looked directly at me and said that. And then I realized, oh, wow, you're God. Because in catechism classes as a child, I remember hearing, God can hear your thoughts. Be careful of your thoughts. I never believed it. But here he was listening to my thought. That was only my thought. I never said it out loud. And then I felt so awkward, and I wanted to apologize any way that I could. So I was saying, oh, forgive me, God, your holiness. And he could see I was struggling with my words, and everybody was staring at me at the table. And he finally looked at me and he said, I'm not upset by that word. I mean, that's a man-made word. You're forgiven. And he said, but be careful what you think, because I hear those thoughts too. And be careful what you wish for, because I hear those too. And I was like, wow. So then it was shortly after that, he said, and I thought, oh God, this is where I go to hell, because I didn't believe in heaven. I started to feel real comfortable. And I thought, okay, well, this is where the shoe drops, the other shoe, But he said, I forgave you. He said, you asked for forgiveness. And he said, you asked for forgiveness many, many times. And he said, you didn't kill a soul. You can't kill a soul. He said, all you did was send him back to heaven. And now he's waiting for you on earth. And I thought, wow, that changed my soul and the way in which I felt, because I'd carried guilt around for 18 years. And that's that's really, really difficult to do. It's something that's difficult to live with. It's such a decision, and you're shamed and you're told all of these different things by various churches. And I was, with the Catholic Church. So it is what it is. But after we got through that, then God said, I want you to feel comfortable. I just want you to feel comfortable and relax. And I thought, what does that mean? Because I didn't know how to feel comfortable in the presence of all of these souls. And I hadn't really felt comfortable throughout my life for various reasons. Had a lot of insecurities, felt, not like I was valued or worth anything. So here is God telling me to feel comfortable in love, and I don't know how to do that. So then finally, I remember I thought, well, he really wants me to feel comfortable. So I just put my arm up over the golden chair and I said, well, then I'm just going to be myself. To which everybody at the table started laughing. And it was so great because I thought, oh, and they have a sense of humor. This is fantastic. So that was the beginning of my getting into temple and receiving my first few messages from God. I'll share with you, there was a moment where God was explaining certain things to me, and he reached his hand up and with his hand opened the dome above us. And he was showing me the galaxy, and he was pointing to the stars, and he was talking about where people come from and how people come from stars, or they come from different planets. So all souls are on these different planets. It's like he was, now that I think about it, I didn't think about this previously, but it's almost as if he was preparing me for what I was going to see inside of heaven. So I listened, and then I was told to stand up and start walking around the table. And I had to stop at each soul who I came to, and each soul had a message for me. The first soul to my right was Archangel Michael. Then there were 26 archangels to his right. Then there was Melchizedek, and he sat to the left of Goddess. So I remember standing next to Goddess, and she looked at me and she smiled, and she was so gentle, so incredibly beautiful. I had never seen a female this beautiful in my entire life. And I thought, wow. And she smiled, very gentle in her demeanor. And she said, Megan, it's okay to be yourself. Just be yourself. And I looked at her and I said, thank you. And I remember hearing from every soul at the table, blessings received, which is the highest vibration of saying thank you. So it was almost as if they were reminding me that, yeah, this is how we say it here. And it felt very comfortable. So after Goddess, there was Sitting Bull to her right, and then White Eagle. And White Eagle, I was familiar with from this little book that my grandmother gave me when I was a teenager, because my mother went from Catholicism to Hinduism when I was 11. So my grandmother was trying to basically bridge the gap. She didn't have any control over how my brothers and I were being raised. So she was trying to show me that I understand, and here's love with this person's, poems. And they were just these short little thoughts, basically. And it's called The Quiet Mind by White Eagle. And here I'm standing before White Eagle. And I'll never forget it. From the moment he said this to me, he looked at me and he said, Megan, when you come across a white feather, this is not a tribal thing. He said, I want you to ask yourself, are you doing or are you being? And I was thinking, how do I answer this? He could see I had that face on, like, what's the right answer to this? He says, no, you don't have to answer it. He said, I want you to think about it. And I thought, okay. And I've never forgotten it. After White Eagle, there's so much that happened. So I'm going to move along to God. And I remember standing next to God. He said, Megan, you're the driver of the car. Okay. Your car. He said, I'm your passenger. We come to a fork in the road. Which way are you going to go? Left or right? And I thought, like, this was a trick question, like I was supposed to know something by now. And he smiled and he says, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you go left. It doesn't matter if you go right. He said, I'm always going to be your passenger. And I thought, wow, that is so cool. How beautiful is that? So I'll never forget that. And then I asked God very respectfully, I said, may I touch your cheek? And he responded very, very sweetly. And he said, yes. And so I took my right hand, the back of my hand, and I touched his left cheek. And then I gently took my hand away and I thanked him, blessed blessings received. And I said, now I can tell people that I touched the face of God. And he smiled, and everybody was smiling at me. So those are some of the things I'll share with you inside of temple. But moving along, I was allowed into heaven now, however many times I went around the table. I don't know how long that took because there is no time there. So Jesus had come and asked me to meet with him. So we went into my tent because I had to stay in this tent. And it was this beautiful royal purple color. So I remember sitting in the tent and he said, so what seems to be bothering you still? What are you still having trouble with? And I said, Jesus, I'm having such a hard time with how I've been treated in my life, with how I've been abused, with how I've been ignored, abandoned, neglected. I said, look, I don't know how to be okay with this. Now, all of you in temple said from God on, they all said acceptance is synonymous with love. And I said, and I'm trying. I just don't know how to incorporate the acceptance of this still. And Jesus looked at me and he said, okay, well, I want you to think about every circumstance that you've experienced in your life. He said, these are children. Each one is a different child. Knowing this, what would you do to those children? Immediately I responded, evict them, get them out. I said, they're old enough. They can move out on their own. And he smiled and he kind of chuckled and he goes, okay, we need to talk about this more. So he explained how each child had been neglected. Each child had never been nurtured. Each child was in pain, whether it be emotionally, at times physically, spiritually for sure, and psychologically. And so after he gave me more of a talk, he said the same question. He said, okay, now that you hear it like this, what each child represents, what would you do with these children and what would you name them? And I just remember feeling like, wow, that was powerful. And I said to Jesus, I said, I would nurture these children. I would embrace them. I would speak to each of them. I would comfort them any way that I could. I would listen to them. He said, what would you name them? To which I looked down and I had tears welling up and I looked back up at Jesus and I said, love. Every one of these children was a gift of love. And he said, you're starting to understand. He said, good. So that was such a powerful moment. But all of a sudden, I remember these cherubs, they were gold, and they started to come into the tent. And there were 300 of them. Now, they didn't all come inside. And the tent, it was big. But they come in and they start lining the walls of the tent. And then they were lining the walls of the outside of the tent. And in walked Prophet Muhammad. Now, I'd met him in temple and I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know anything about Islam. I was surprised and all of us stood and we bowed out of respect to him because as it turns out, what I learned was that Prophet Muhammad and Jesus are the same love frequency and that it's God, Prophet Muhammad and Jesus who make up this tapestry of a sort. It's almost like it looks like a negative from one of the cameras when you take pictures. So the negative, that black and white kind of, that's what it looks like over this galaxy that we're in. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But back to Prophet Muhammad, he indicated with his hands, everybody sit down. And we did. And he directly looked at me. He said, Megan, you will go back to Earth. You will tell everybody. I've been with the Middle East since I left. I've been praying for them ever since I left. He said, I pray for the whole world. He said, I want the best for everybody. I love everybody. I have love to give for everybody. I want you to tell everyone that you saw me here. I looked at Prophet Muhammad after he was done talking to me, and he just kind of looked at me, and I very softly, respectfully, sincerely spoke to him and said, may I ask you a question? He said, yes. And I said, why me? Why are you telling me all of this? I don't know anything about Islam. I don't know anything about you. I came in here an atheist of 18 years and I grew up Roman Catholic. That's all I've got. I don't know what else to tell you. And he said, I have my ways. He was so confident in giving me this information and letting me know that there was no mistake here. So he just then looked at me and he says, my time allotted with you has come to an end. I must leave now. Put the book out. And then he turned around and he started walking out. And then all of the cherubs followed him. So I've come back and I didn't know how to tell all of this. But as the years have gone on since this experience happened, which was 16 years ago, this year it'll be 17 years, I've realized that, wow, I have an obligation obligation. I have an obligation to share their stories, in which I did. I wrote about them in the book called A Catalyst, My 5 Days in Heaven. God ordered me to write a book. I didn't know what it was going to be about. He just said, you'll figure it out, because I asked him. I said, what do I write about? He said, you'll figure it out. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've never written a book before. And he said, I don't care. I thought, okay, well, all right. So there was that. He didn't care. I remember there was a moment where I was standing in the center of all of these ascended masters and saints and archangels. And then there were little cherubs fluttering around. And I remember just sobbing. I just did not want to come back to earth. I was like pleading, please don't put me back on earth, because, oh, it has not been easy prior to the near-death experience. And I've had some really difficult times since. So I knew what was coming in that moment. I knew what was coming for me in this life. But did I remember it when I woke up, back on earth? No, I wasn't allowed to remember what was coming. So I remember crying, and everybody started to talk to me, and they all had a message for me in the circle. And some of them lifted up their right hand and they sent that white beam of light to my soul. And actually they all did it simultaneously. And then they started talking individually, and then they would continue one at a time to do the white flame to my soul. But as soon as they all did it, I felt calmed. I stopped crying, and I was filled with this love. The fear was gone, the fear of coming back here on earth. And after I met with all of them, I remember I had to leave. So I had to go meet Jesus again, meet with him. And Saint Germain was sitting under this olive tree. The sun was out, it was beautiful. He was holding his knees close to him. And Jesus and I were standing talking. Jesus said, well, it's that time, you have to go. And I said, Jesus, I don't want to go. I do not want to go back to earth. Please just keep me here. He looked at me and he said, Megan, I don't make the rules. I follow them like you do. And I thought, oh, that's right. Yeah. You work for God. Okay. So Jesus's psychology in this moment, it was perfect. It worked. But he had this picture appear next to him. And it was like this 11 by 14 or 8 by 10 picture of my then husband and my son, our son together. And both of them simultaneously said telepathically, don't go, we need you. And as soon as I heard them say that, and they were looking at me, I looked at Jesus and I said, oh my gosh, I have to get back. I've got to go back to my son. The draw was for my son. And Jesus said, okay, well, then it's time to go. And I said, okay. So I started walking down this road. It's like dirt road. And it was absolutely beautiful. And I had to go to this shack, and I took off my toga or my robe or whatever and the stole, and I had to put it inside this wicker basket. And then I started leaving, walking in the direction back to the clouds, where I had to go back to myself in my hospital room. And as I'm walking, I remember seeing all of these cherubs like coming out before me. And there's Prophet Muhammad again. And he's walking through like a tall grass with flowers and stuff. He's coming out of the trees, the forest. I don't know if it was a forest or what it was, but he comes out and he meets me. So I'm walking this direction. He comes out and meets me in the center. And I looked at him and I thought, wow. I said, I don't want to leave. And he responded very, very gently and sweetly. And he said, Megan, you have to go back. He said, but I'm never leaving your side. My hand will always be at your back. I will always be there for you. And I thought, okay. And I respectfully looked at him and I said, look, I don't know anything about your religion that you've started. And I said, is it okay if I give you a hug? And to which he responded, yes. So I remember standing up on my toes and I put my arms around his neck, and then he put his arms around my back. And it was so sweet. And I just felt this unconditional love. And I let go of my arms around his neck, to which he let go. And I stood there before him and I said, I love you. And he said, I love you too. And then I remember the moment that I came back into my body. I don't remember how it felt. I just remember opening my eyes and there was a nurse in the room. I don't remember who else or if anybody else was in the room, but I looked at her and I said, I just saw Jesus, because I didn't remember Muhammad right away, but I did remember Jesus. So she said, you did? And I said, I did. It was so amazing. It was absolutely amazing. So one of the last things I think I will share with you about this experience that's so important to know are two things. One, as God, Jesus, Muhammad, and many others said to me in heaven, acceptance is synonymous with love. That is so important for each of us to step into our days and practice that. Acceptance is synonymous with love. That even means our past lives. that even means what's happened to us in this life. And that is really hard to say, considering the types of situations that our world is faced with right now. That's very difficult to say. But I assure you that we all experience what we experience for a reason and for a cause. And the reason is love. So what I realized in heaven was that heaven, it's not a religious place. Yes, there are different religions that are there. I mean, obviously, Muhammad, Jesus, Kuan Yin, who else did I meet? Krishna, Lakshmi, Vishnu, Kali. I even met Ganesh. I remember seeing Ganesh there. So there were so many different belief systems and faiths, and everyone was working in unison. So it's possible to look at one another and give each other a high five or shake each other's hand and say, good job. You've been here trying to spread the word of love. That's it, the word of love. Because religion, it's not a separate feeling in heaven. If there's one religion that they do follow in heaven, it's Judaism. So that is the first religion, by the way, from which everything was created with the Star of David. That's a whole long story, which I don't have time for, but I do talk about it in the book that God ordered me to write. Yeah, I think it's just very important that each of us start to rethink how we respond to life, how we react. And rather than react, let's just listen, take our guard down, and try to come to an understanding of every situation and look at another person first before making a judgment, because really the judgment, it's unnecessary. There is no judgment in heaven. Just look at each other, and look at the person who's before you and remember that that person has a backstory. That person has a life before that moment. And what is that person's life? And if you can't understand that person's life, well, accept it. And if it's not good, then change it. And how do you change it? You come together. No one can do one thing alone. We all have to work together. So here's what I found the other day. I just happened to be reading and I came across this message from Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi. It says, be intentional with your energy, be intentional with your time, be intentional with your words, be intentional with your craft, be intentional with your breathing, be intentional with your heart, be intentional with your habits, be intentional with your focus, be intentional with your self-talk, be intentional with your life. This is your power. And that just resonated so strongly with me. And seeing as how I met Gandhi in heaven, I thought, why not share what Gandhi's already said? Why not put the spotlight back in our history of those who have tried to create peace and love for everyone? So that's all I have to share with you right now regarding this near-death experience. And it's been a pleasure sharing it with you. And thank you so much for having me on this platform of love. I really appreciate it.